When Ethan Parker bought his dream home, he thought he was moving into a peaceful retreat, a secluded property, surrounded by nature, far from the noise and chaos of a homeowners association, HOA. What he didn't expect was that his land would become a battleground for entitled neighbors who thought they could use it as their personal shortcut. At first, he didn't notice it. His property included a narrow dirt path that stretched from the main road to the back of an HOA community. It wasn't paved, but it was clear enough to resemble an old access road. Ethan assumed it was something the previous owners had used, for maintenance, or maybe it was just an overgrown trail. But then he started seeing the tire tracks. One morning, while sipping his coffee on the porch, Ethan watched in disbelief as a car casually turned onto his land and drove right through it, cutting across his property and disappearing into the HOA neighborhood. At first, he thought it was a one-time mistake. But then it happened again, and again. Within weeks, it had become a daily occurrence. SUVs, sedans, even delivery trucks, all using his private property as a public road. Ethan tried polite gestures at first, standing outside and waving at the drivers, hoping they'd realize their mistake. But most ignored him. Some even looked at him as if he was the one in the wrong, as if he had no business standing there. Then came the final straw. One evening, Ethan pulled into his driveway and noticed deep tire ruts carved into the dirt path. As he stepped out, his heart sank. A section of his yard had been completely torn up. Someone had taken the turn too wide, spun out, and left a mess of churned-up grass and mud in their wake. That was it. Ethan wasn't going to let his land be treated like a public highway. He did what any responsible property owner would do. He called the HOA, hoping they'd help stop their residents from trespassing. But they refused. "The land isn't under our jurisdiction," the HOA representative told him. "It's your problem." That was all Ethan needed to hear. If the HOA wouldn't do anything about it, then he would. It was time to take control of his own property, and he already had a plan. The confrontation with Olivia Ethan Parker had given the HOA a chance to handle the situation, and they had refused. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. The first step was to secure his property. He hired a contractor to install a sturdy metal gate and a reinforced fence along the strip of land that the HOA residents had been using as their personal shortcut. He also placed clear, bold, no trespassing signs along the property line. Ethan figured this would be the end of it. After all, normal people would take the hint. But he had underestimated just how entitled his HOA neighbors were. The gate rage incident less. Then a week after the fence went up, Ethan returned home one Saturday afternoon and was greeted by the sound of a car horn blaring aggressively. Confused, he parked his truck and stepped out, only to find a furious woman standing outside a sleek, overpriced SUV, repeatedly honking at the closed gate. She was middle-aged, dressed in a perfectly pressed blazer and slacks, her short blonde hair styled into a sharp, no-nonsense bob. Her arms were crossed, her foot tapped impatiently, and her scowl could have curdled milk. Ethan didn't recognize her at first, but the moment she saw him, she marched toward him like a woman on a mission. Are you the one who put up this ridiculous gate?" she snapped, her voice dripping with authority she didn't actually have. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yes, ma'am. This is my property, and I got tired of people using it as a road." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Open it. Now. I'm already late." That's when it clicked. She wasn't just any HOA resident, she was on the board. "You must be Olivia Carter," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "I've heard about you." Olivia looked taken aback for a split second, but then her smug expression returned. "Good. Then you should know that I'm on the HOA board, and this little stunt of yours is unacceptable. We've been using this road for years. You have no right to block access." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Actually, I do. This is private property. The HOA has no authority over it." Her face turned red. "Listen here," she hissed, stepping closer. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this little fence of yours is causing a major inconvenience for the neighborhood. You are interfering with our daily lives." Ethan's patience was wearing thin. "I don't care," he said, his voice firm. "This isn't a public road. It never was. You and your neighbors have been trespassing. That stops now." Entitlement turns. To threats, Olivia's nostrils flared. "You don't understand. The HOA will hear about this. You'll regret it. Ethan simply shrugged. Let them. They already told me it's not their jurisdiction. That seemed to set her off even more. She pulled out her phone, her fingers furiously. The police get involved. Ethan stood his ground as 2 squad cars pulled up minutes later, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, approaching him with neutral but curious expressions. We got a call about someone blocking a public road, one officer said. Ethan exhaled sharply. Of course, Olivia had lied. Officer, this isn't a public road, Ethan said, already pulling out the property map he had printed earlier. This is private property. I put up this gate to stop trespassers. The officer took the document and looked it over carefully. Meanwhile, Olivia was animatedly talking to the other officer, her voice rising in outrage as she waved her arms in frustration. After a few minutes, the officer with the property map nodded. This is clear-cut. The land belongs to Mr. Parker. He has every right to put up a gate. Olivia's head snapped toward them. What? That's ridiculous. We've been using this access point for years. That should count for something. The officer gave her a long, unimpressed look. Ma'am, prior use does not override property ownership. This is his land, and you are trespassing. For the first time, Olivia actually looked nervous. The power shift. The officer turned to Ethan. Do you want to press trespassing charges? Ethan studied Olivia for a moment. She was fuming, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But there was also a flicker of fear in her eyes. He considered it, but then he shook his head. Not today. But if she, or anyone else, tries to use my land again, I won't hesitate. The officer nodded. Understood. We'll document this incident in case there are future issues. As the police wrapped up their report, Olivia turned to Ethan, her voice low and seething. This isn't over, Ethan smirked. Oh, I know, but neither am I. As she stormed back to her car and sped off, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. If Olivia and the HOA thought they could bully him, they were in for a rude awakening. Escalation. HOA declares war. Ethan Parker knew Olivia Carter wasn't going to back down easily. The look in her eyes as she sped away after the police left told him that much. For the next few days, things were eerily quiet. No more cars tried to cut through his property. No more entitled HOA members honked their horns at his gate. For the first time since he'd moved in, Ethan felt a sense of peace. But he should have known better. OAs don't like losing. The HOA's next move started with a letter taped to his gate. Ethan found it early one morning when he went outside to grab his mail. The envelope was marked Urgent HOA Board Review. He ripped it open and scanned the contents. Dear Mr. Parker, it has come to our attention that you have installed a fence and gate that is negatively impacting the community. As this access point has been in use for years, we request an immediate meeting to discuss the obstruction of what has long been considered a community road. Please be advised that failure to comply may result in further action from the HOA board. Sincerely, HOA Board of Directors. Ethan laughed out loud. A community road. They were really trying that angle? He knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to pressure him into removing the gate, just like Olivia had tried to do in person. But there was one small problem. The HOA had no legal authority over his land. Preparing for battle, Ethan wasn't going to let them intimidate him. That night, he sat down and gathered every piece of documentation he had. Property deeds showing his exact boundaries. Official zoning maps proving the land was private property. Video evidence from his security cameras of HOA members trespassing before he put up the gate. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. The HOA meeting showdown. The following week, Ethan walked into the HOA's meeting room like he owned the place. The board sat at a long conference table, their expressions smug. Olivia, of course, was there, arms crossed, lips pursed like she had already won. The HOA president, an older man named Richard Langley, cleared his throat. Mr. Parker, we appreciate you coming. We need to discuss your obstruction of a commonly used neighborhood access point. Ethan leaned back in his chair. That's interesting, he said, because last time I checked, that access point was my property. The board members exchanged glances. Richard sighed, as if he were speaking to a child. Yes, We understand that you technically own the land, but we've been using that road for years. You can't just take away something the community relies on." Ethan smirked. "Actually, I can, and I did, because it's my land, and you were all trespassing." The room fell silent. Olivia leaned forward, eyes burning. "This isn't about trespassing, Ethan. It's about community harmony. You're making life harder for everyone in the neighborhood." Ethan pulled out his folder of documents and spread them across the table. "Here's my property deed. Here's the zoning map. Here's security footage of your arrests." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Olivia, however, wasn't giving up that easily. "Look," she said, voice dripping with forced patience. "We don't have to make this ugly. The HOA is willing to work with you. If you just take down the gate, we could come to an agreement." Ethan chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure you'd love that. But here's the thing. Your agreement isn't legally enforceable. And frankly, I don't trust any of you." Richard cleared his throat again. "If you refuse to cooperate, the HOA will be forced to escalate this matter." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Richard folded his hands. "We may pursue legal action." Ethan grinned. "Please do. I'd love to see how that works out for you." The HOA's bluff gets called. Ethan walked out of that meeting with his head held high. The HOA had nothing. No legal claim. No real power. But Olivia? She was furious. She followed him into the parking lot, her heels clicking against the pavement. "You think this is over?" she snapped. Ethan turned and gave her the most unimpressed look imaginable. "No, Olivia, I think you lost." And with that, he drove away, leaving her seething. The HOA's last attempt. A few days later, Ethan received another letter, this time threatening a lawsuit. He took it straight to his lawyer, who laughed after reading it. "They don't have a case. They're bluffing." Ethan decided to take things one step further. He reached out to a local news station that often covered HOA abuse cases and sent them his story, along with his security footage. Public exposure changes. Everything. The news report aired a week later, exposing how the HOA had tried to claim control over private property and how they had harassed Ethan for doing something completely legal. The public loved it. The HOA, not so much. The very next morning, Ethan received a final letter from the board. "Dear Mr. Parker, after further review, we have decided not to pursue any action regarding the access road. We regret any misunderstanding and will instruct residents to respect private property. Sincerely, HOA Board of Directors." Translation: They gave up. Even better? Olivia Carter was quietly removed from the HOA board a month later. Ethan had won. His fence stayed up, his gate remained locked, and no one ever drove through his property again. The HOA's final desperate act. Ethan Parker thought he had won. The HOA had backed down. The letter they sent admitted defeat, and Olivia Carter had been quietly removed from the board. It felt like the neighborhood had finally accepted that his property was not theirs to control. But, as he had learned by now, some people just don't know when to quit. At first, everything seemed peaceful. No more cars cutting through his land, no more letters demanding he remove the gate, and best of all, no more Olivia Carter. Or so he thought. Mysterious complaints. It started small. One morning, Ethan was woken up by loud knocking on his door. He opened it to find a city code enforcement officer standing on his porch. "Sir, we received a complaint about an unpermitted structure on your property," the officer said, holding a clipboard. Ethan blinked. "What?" the officer gestured, toward his fence and gate. "Your fence. We got a report that it was built without proper zoning permits." Ethan laughed. "That's not true. I made sure everything was permitted before I even hired the contractor." He walked inside, grabbed his paperwork and handed it over. The officer flipped through the documents, nodded, and sighed. "Everything looks good here. Sorry for the inconvenience. Looks like someone wasted our time." Ethan didn't even have to guess who had filed the false complaint. More petty harassment. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan noticed a pattern. His garbage bins mysteriously disappeared, only for him to find them tossed in random places down the street. Someone filed a noise complaint, even though he wasn't home at the time. A HOA member parked their car right in front of his gate, blocking access to his driveway. The pettiness was laughable. They had no legal way to force him to take down his gate, so now they were trying to annoy him into giving up. But Ethan had come too far to let a few childish pranks get under his skin, catching Olivia in the act. Then, one night, his security cameras caught something interesting. At around 2:30 a.m., a shadowy figure crept up to his gate and started tampering with the hinges. The person had a wrench in hand, clearly trying to loosen the bolts. Ethan zoomed in, and there she was, Olivia Carter. She was so desperate to reclaim her fake access road that she had resorted to sneaking onto his property in the middle of the night. Calling the cops, for real. This time Ethan didn't even hesitate. He called the police and explained the situation. When they arrived, he showed them the live security feed, which still displayed Olivia standing at the gate, struggling with the bolts. Within minutes, officers surrounded her. "Ma'am, step away from the property," one officer commanded. Olivia spun around, eyes wide, caught red-handed. "This is a misunderstanding," she blurted out. I was just making sure it was safe." Ethan stepped outside, arms crossed. "Oh, I'm sure you were." One of the officers turned to Ethan. "Do you want to press charges for trespassing and attempted vandalism?" Olivia froze. Ethan thought about it. This woman had harassed him for weeks, tried to take his land, filed false reports against him, and now she was literally sneaking onto his property to sabotage his gate. He took a deep breath. "Yes, I do. Olivia Carter gets what she deserves." The moment the officers placed handcuffs around Olivia's wrists, she lost it. "You can't do this! I'm on the HOA board!" she screamed. One of the officers chuckled. "Not anymore, ma'am." As they led her to the squad car, she locked eyes with Ethan, seething. "You'll regret this." Ethan smirked. "Oh, I really don't think I will." The fallout. The next morning, news spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered as they saw Olivia's mugshot in the local paper. The HOA tried to distance themselves from her, publicly stating that Olivia's actions were not representative of the board, but it was too late. The entire neighborhood now saw what kind of power-hungry tyrants had been running their HOA. Shortly after, a petition circulated calling for a complete leadership change within the HOA. Within a month, the entire board was replaced. Ethan's victory, with Olivia gone and the HOA under new leadership, the harassment finally stopped. His gate stayed up, his property remained untouched, and, for the first time, Ethan could actually enjoy his home in peace. He had stood his ground. He had refused to let entitled neighbors steal what wasn't theirs. And in the end, he had won. Peace returns, for good. With Olivia Carter gone and the HOA under new leadership, Ethan Parker could finally breathe easy. The battle was over, and the victory was his. For weeks, he had endured harassment, false complaints, and trespassing, all because certain HOA members felt entitled to his land. He had dealt with legal threats, vandalism attempts, and even a desperate break-in by Olivia herself. But in the end, justice had prevailed. The HOA, once filled with self-important busybodies, had been completely restructured after Olivia's arrest. A new group of homeowners, people who actually cared about fairness rather than control, had taken over. And most importantly, nobody tried to use his property as a road ever again. A final letter from the HOA one afternoon. Ethan found one last letter in his mailbox from the newly appointed HOA president. "Dear Mr. Parker, on behalf of the HOA, I want to formally apologize for the way you were treated. What happened to you was unacceptable, and I want to assure you that things will be different moving forward. We recognize that your property is private, and that the actions taken by certain individuals do not reflect the values we wish to uphold. You will have our full support in ensuring your land is respected. If you ever experience any further issues, please reach out to us directly. Sincerely, the new HOA board." Ethan smirked as he folded the letter. It was about time. The neighborhood's changing attitude. As weeks passed, Ethan noticed a shift in how his neighbors treated him. The same people who had once cut through his land without a second thought now waved politely from the sidewalk. Some even stopped to apologize for how things had escalated. A few admitted that they had felt pressured by Olivia and the old HOA to keep pushing for the shortcut. But now that she was gone, they wanted to move on peacefully. Ethan, though still wary, accepted their apologies. He wasn't one to hold grudges, as long as they respected his boundaries. Enjoying his property. Again. For the first time since moving in, Ethan could finally enjoy the home he had worked so hard for. He could sit on his porch in the mornings, sipping coffee without worrying about cars tearing through his yard. His security cameras remained in place, but now they only captured the peaceful scenery of his land, rather than trespassers trying to claim it as their own. There were no more threats, no more disputes, no more HOA drama, just quiet, just peace. The best revenge. Ethan never wanted a war with his neighbors. He never planned to go up against an HOA or expose a corrupt board member on the evening news. All he ever wanted was to protect what was his. And in the end, that's exactly what he did. The best revenge wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about watching Olivia get hauled away in handcuffs or the HOA scrambling to save face. The best revenge was simply living well, knowing that he had stood his ground, fought for his rights, and won. And with that thought, Ethan Parker took another sip of coffee, leaned back on his porch, and smiled. His land was his again, and no one would ever take it from him. A new chapter begins. Ethan Parker had faced one of the worst HOA nightmares imaginable, entitled Neighbors, Legal Threats, Harassment, and even Vandalism. But through it all, he had stood his ground, refusing to let anyone take what was rightfully his. Now, with Olivia Carter gone, the HOA restructured, and the harassment finally over, his life had returned to the way it was supposed to be. Peaceful, quiet, and entirely his own. There were no more unwanted cars tearing through his property. No more petty complaints or false reports. No more angry HOA members banging on his door, demanding he comply with their made-up rules. For the first time since moving in, Ethan truly felt at home. Lessons learned. Looking back, Ethan realized this whole ordeal had taught him some valuable lessons, not just about HOAs, but about power, entitlement, and the importance of knowing your rights. Bullies only win when you let them. Olivia and the HOA had counted on him to back down, but he refused, and that made all the difference. Knowledge is power. By doing his research and ensuring he had all legal documents in order, Ethan was always one step ahead of his opponents. Public exposure is a game changer. The moment the HOA realized their actions could be broadcast to the entire town, they folded. Sometimes the best way to fight injustice is to make sure everyone sees it. The best revenge is simply protecting what's yours. In the end, Ethan didn't need to destroy the HOA or make them suffer. He just needed to win back his peace. Moving forward now, Ethan could finally focus on what he had wanted all along, enjoying his property, his home, and the quiet life he had worked so hard for. As he stood on his porch, watching the sunrise over his now secured land, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. No one was going to take his property from him. Not then, not ever. And as far as he was concerned, that was the only victory that mattered. Standing your ground. A lesson in resilience. Ethan Parker's story is more than just a battle over property. It's a powerful lesson about knowing your rights, standing up against entitlement, and refusing to be bullied. In life, there will always be people who believe they can take advantage of others, whether through intimidation, manipulation, or sheer persistence. But as Ethan proved, power only works when you allow it to. This story teaches us that knowledge is your greatest weapon. Understanding your rights, doing your research, and having proof to back up your claims can mean the difference between being a victim and taking control. It also shows that justice doesn't always happen immediately, but with patience and determination, the truth will prevail. Most importantly, it reminds us that the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about protecting what's yours, moving forward and living a peaceful, fulfilled life. Want more gripping stories of justice, resilience, and standing up to entitlement? Hit like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more eye-opening content.